The first thing that broke through the fog was the smell. It was a sterile, chemical sharpness, a scent that tried to promise cleanliness, but only screamed of sickness and antiseptic fear. Alistair Finch's head throbbed in a dull, brutal rhythm, each beat a hammer against the inside of his skull. He blinked, and the fluorescent lights of the hospital ceiling stabbed at his eyes. A rhythmic, insistent beeping pulsed from somewhere to his left, a metronome counting out the seconds of this nightmare. He was sitting, slumped in a hard plastic chair that was molded in a way that defied human comfort. His suit, a tailored $1,000 armor of charcoal gray wool, felt like a cage. His silk tie was a noose he'd forgotten to loosen. He tried to speak, but his mouth was sandpaper. "Where?" The voice that came out was a stranger's, a dry rasp. A woman in blue scrubs turned, her face a mask of professional sympathy that did nothing to soothe the frantic animal clawing inside his chest. "Mr. Finch, you're in the pediatric emergency waiting area. Your wife is just down the hall, speaking with the doctor." But that wasn't right. Catherine was, she was at the picnic. They were all at the picnic. Leo. The name hit him like a physical blow, sucking the air from his lungs. Leo. His son. The animal in his chest went wild, shredding the last of his composure. He surged to his feet, the world tilting violently. "Leo, where is my son?" And that's when he saw her. Sitting on a chair opposite him, almost lost in its plastic shell, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, with big, dark eyes that were fixed on him with a solemn, unblinking intensity. Her dress was a simple cotton print, faded from many washings, and her dark hair was held back by a single, slightly bent clip. In her small lap, she was clutching a child's baseball cap. It was navy blue, with a hand-stitched, slightly lopsided L on the front. Leo's hat. His son's favorite hat. The world narrowed to that hat, that little girl, and the terrifying silent question in her enormous eyes. The day before had begun with the satisfying masculine scent of coffee and control. Alistair stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his corner office on the 50th floor, the city sprawling beneath him like a circuit board he had personally designed and powered. The sky was a crisp, cloudless blue, the kind of sky that made a man feel like he could own it. He was Alistair Finch, CEO of Finch Industries, a titan in a city of giants, and this view was his daily affirmation. His reflection in the glass was impeccable, the sharp lines of his suit, the Windsor knot of his tie, the glint of his Patek Philippe watch. It was the image of success, an image he had cultivated with the same ruthless precision he applied to his company's quarterly reports. He took a sip of his coffee, black and bitter, just the way he liked it. No room for sweetness or dilution in his world. His morning routine was a ritual of efficiency. A 5 a.m. workout, a protein-focused breakfast consumed while scanning global market reports on his tablet, and a chauffeured ride to the office where he would arrive precisely at 7:30 a.m., a full hour before most of his senior staff. Punctuality wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon. It told everyone that his time was more valuable than theirs. It set the tone for a day of merciless productivity. He turned from the window as his executive assistant, a perpetually flustered woman named Carol, entered with his morning briefing. He didn't greet her. He simply extended a hand for the folder. "The preliminary numbers from the acquisition are on top, sir," she said, her voice a little too eager to please. "And a reminder about the final prep for the company picnic tomorrow." Alistair grunted, already scanning the columns of figures. The picnic, a necessary, if tedious, exercise in corporate morale. It was Catherine's idea, mostly. She insisted it was important for the employees to see him as a family man, to feel like they were part of a larger Finch family. Alistair knew better. They were cogs in a machine. A happy cog might be a slightly more productive cog, but it was a cog nonetheless. Still, the optics were important. A smiling CEO with his charming wife and well-behaved son, it played well in the lifestyle section of the business journals. It humanized the brand. Make sure the caterers are using the linen napkins, not the paper ones, he said without looking up. And I want the corporate banners placed at the main entrance and the pavilion. Tasteful, but prominent. Of course, Mr. Finch. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand and settled behind his desk, a vast expanse of polished mahogany that served as his throne. The numbers were good. The acquisition of a smaller, struggling tech firm was already showing promise. He had gutted their bloated management, streamlined their operations, and absorbed their most valuable patents. It was a bloodbath, according to the niche tech blogs. He called it progress. His focus was absolute. A laser beam that burned through spreadsheets and contracts, incinerating inefficiencies. He was in his element, a predator in his natural habitat. Hours passed in a blur of phone calls, video conferences, and terse, demanding emails. He was a master of delegation, not of tasks, but of pressure. He didn't tell people what to do. He set impossible targets and expected them to find a way to meet them. Failure was not an option. It was a termination offense. It was on his way to a late afternoon board meeting that the incident occurred. He preferred to take the stairs for the last 2 floors down to the boardroom, a small assertion of physical dominance over the elevator-bound executives. As he descended the grand marble staircase into the main lobby, his eyes trained to spot any imperfection snagged on something. It was a flaw in the perfection he had built. There, on the gleaming white marble floor, was a smudge. It was faint, a greasy, ghost-like smear, near the base of a structural column, almost invisible to a casual observer. But Alistair was not a casual observer. His stride didn't falter, but his jaw tightened. This lobby was the first impression clients had of Finch Industries. It was designed to awe, to intimidate, to convey a sense of unassailable power and meticulous attention to detail. This smudge was a betrayal. It was a crack in the armor. It was a sign of complacency. And complacency was the one enemy he could not tolerate. He didn't stop. He continued into the boardroom, his face an unreadable mask, but a cold fury was simmering inside him. He nodded curtly to the assembled board members, took his seat at the head of the table, and began the meeting. He was sharp, incisive, cutting down a poorly researched proposal from the marketing department with a few surgical questions. But beneath the surface of the discussion about market share and Q4 projections, his mind was replaying the sight of that smudge. It grew in his imagination until it was a gaping stain, a symbol of the rot that could creep into any organization if vigilance was not maintained. The moment the meeting concluded, he summoned his head of operations, a portly, sweating man named Gerald. "There is a smudge on the lobby floor," Alistair said, his voice quiet, which was always more terrifying than when he shouted. "By the 3rd column on the east side." Gerald blinked, his mind clearly struggling to switch from billion-dollar projections to janitorial matters. "A smudge, sir?" Do not make me repeat myself, Gerald. This is your domain. The presentation of this building reflects on the entire company. It reflects on me. A smudge of that nature suggests a catastrophic failure in our maintenance protocols. I want to know who was on duty for this section, and I want them gone. Today. Gerald turned a pale shade of green. Gone, sir. You mean terminated? Alistair leveled a gaze at him that could freeze water. Is there another definition of gone with which I am unfamiliar? Handle it. I don't want to see his face in this building again, and I don't want to see so much as a fingerprint on that marble tomorrow. Is that understood? Yes, Mr. Finch. Perfectly. Gerald practically scurried out of the room, leaving Alistair alone with the satisfying feeling of a problem identified and a solution decisively implemented. He had cut out the cancer before it could spread. It didn't matter who the man was. He was a faulty component, and faulty components were replaced. That was the simple, brutal arithmetic of success. He put the incident out of his mind, turning his attention back to the silent, waiting city beyond his window. He had an empire to run. He had no time to spare for the insignificant lives of the people who polished its floors. Samuel gently pushed the mop across the floor, the rhythmic, swishing sound, a familiar comfort in the echoing silence of the empty office building. It was late, long after the last of the ambitious young men and women in their sharp suits had clicked their way across these same floors, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive cologne and the day's debris. This was his time, when the towering monument to commerce and capitalism became his quiet, solitary kingdom. He was a janitor, a cleaner, a custodian. The titles changed, but the work remained the same: to erase the evidence of the day, to reset the stage for the next performance. And he took pride in it. He saw the streaks others missed, the dust that gathered in the hidden corners, the faint scuff marks on the baseboards. To do a job well, any job, was a matter of dignity. His father, a carpenter, had taught him that. It doesn't matter if you're building a house or sweeping a floor, son, he used to say. You put your name on it with the quality of your work. Samuel's name was written in the spotless gleam of the marble, the invisible clarity of the glass doors, the fresh, clean scent that greeted the building's occupants each morning. Tonight, however, his mind wasn't entirely on his work. It was on Maya, his daughter, his whole world. She had a field trip tomorrow, a trip to the science museum that she had been talking about for weeks. The permission slip and the $12 fee were sitting on their small kitchen table, a reminder of the constant, gentle pressure of providing. He had the $12, of course. He always made sure there was enough for things like that, but it was the bigger picture that gnawed at him. The rent on their small apartment had gone up again. Maya was growing out of her shoes at a speed he found both miraculous and terrifying. He'd been hoping to pick up some extra shifts, maybe do some weekend work, but everything was tight. He finished the upper floors and took the service elevator down to the grand lobby. This was the showpiece, a cathedral of corporate power, with its soaring atrium and floors of imported Italian marble that shone like frozen milk. He had spent hours on that marble the night before, buffing it to a mirror finish. He ran his hand over the cool, smooth surface, admiring his own handiwork. That's when he heard the squeal. He looked up to see a young woman, probably an intern working late, rushing towards the revolving doors. She was juggling a designer handbag, a laptop case, and a leaky cup of what smelled like a vanilla latte. As she fumbled for her phone, the cup tilted, and a small, milky brown droplet escaped, landing on the pristine floor. She didn't notice. She was already through the doors and gone, her hurried footsteps echoing on the pavement outside. Samuel sighed. It wasn't a big deal. He grabbed a soft cloth and a bottle of his gentlest cleaning solution from his cart. He knelt down, his knees creaking in protest, and carefully wiped away the spot. But as he did, the cloth, which he now realized he'd used earlier to wipe down a metal railing, left a faint, greasy smear. It was barely there, a ghost of a mark that you could only see if the light hit it just right. He frowned, reaching for a fresh, dry cloth to buff it out. But just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who watched Maya for him in the evenings. Maya has a bit of a tummy ache, crying for her papa. Samuel's heart clenched. All thoughts of the smudge vanished. Maya was everything. He quickly packed up his cart, his movements suddenly urgent. He'd give the smudge an extra polish during his final sweep. It was nothing. No one would ever see it. His priority was his little girl. He found her curled up on Mrs. Gable's floral sofa, her face pale. She looked up at him with wide, miserable eyes. "My tummy hurts, Papa." He scooped her into his arms, her small body light and warm against his chest. He held her close, burying his face in her hair, breathing in her unique scent of crayon wax and little girl shampoo. "I'm here, my little bird," he whispered. "Papa's here." He took her home, made her some chamomile tea, and read her 3 of her favorite stories until her eyelids drooped and her breathing evened out into the soft sighs of sleep. He sat by her bed for a long time, watching the rise and fall of her chest, his heart swelling with a love so fierce it was almost painful. This was what mattered. Not the gleam on a rich man's floor, but the health and happiness of this precious child. He was so focused on Maya that he forgot all about the faint, ghostly smear in the grand lobby of the Finch Industries building. The next day, he was called into his supervisor's office. His supervisor, a man named Henderson, wouldn't look him in the eye. He just kept staring at a file on his desk, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm. "Samuel, there was an issue," Henderson began, his voice strained. "A complaint from the top." Samuel frowned. "A complaint? I don't understand. I left everything spotless last night. The lobby floor. Mr. Finch himself saw it." Henderson finally looked up, his eyes full of a weary pity. A smudge. By the 3rd column. Samuel's blood ran cold. The smudge. The tiny, insignificant mark he had meant to buff out. It seemed impossible. Absurd. It was just a tiny... I was going to get it on my final round, but my daughter, she was sick. I had to leave in a hurry." He knew how it sounded. An excuse. A dereliction of duty. "I'm sorry, Samuel. My hands are tied." Henderson pushed a form across the desk. "It's a termination, effective immediately. They said to clear out your locker." The words didn't register at first. Termination. Fired. Gone. Over a smudge. A ghost of a mark on a floor so big you could land a helicopter on it. He thought of the $12 for the field trip. He thought of the rent notice on his fridge. He thought of Maya's shoes. A wave of dizziness washed over him. He had worked here for 5 years. He had never been late, never missed a shift, never received a single complaint. His work was his name. And Alistair Finch had just erased it. "Please, "Mr. Henderson," Samuel heard himself say, his voice thick with a desperation he despised. "My daughter. I'm all she has." Henderson shook his head slowly, his expression grim. "I'm sorry. The order came from Mr. Finch himself. He said he didn't want to see your face in this building again." Samuel walked out of the office in a daze. The building he had cared for, polished, and maintained felt alien and hostile. The employees rushing past him, consumed by their own important worlds, didn't even see him. He was invisible, just like the smudge he had failed to erase. He was a faulty component, and he had been replaced. As he stood at the bus stop, the termination papers folded in his pocket like a lead weight, he felt a single, hot tear trace a path down his cheek. It wasn't for himself. It was for Maya. How was he going to tell his little bird that her papa had lost his job? The day of the company picnic dawned bright and unnaturally warm for an autumn day. Catherine Finch orchestrated the morning with the cheerful efficiency of a field marshal planning a garden party. She had laid out Leo's clothes, a crisp polo shirt and khaki shorts, and was now trying to coax Alistair into a softer, more approachable version of his corporate self. "For heaven's sake, Alistair, can't you wear the blue cashmere sweater I got you? That black quarter zip makes you look like you're about to fire someone," she said, adjusting the collar of her own elegant linen dress. Alistair glanced at his reflection, frowning. "This is performance wear. It's practical. Cashmere at a picnic? It's inefficient. It's a picnic, not a hostile takeover. Try to look like you're enjoying yourself. For Leo." He grunted, but his eyes softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at his son. Leo was sitting on the floor, not playing with his expensive toys, but meticulously arranging a line of shiny, smooth stones he'd collected from the garden. He was a quiet, observant boy, with his mother's gentle eyes and a sensitive nature that Alistair found both endearing and slightly baffling. He wanted his son to be strong, to be a fighter, a successor. He worried that Leo was too soft for the world Alistair ruled. "Leo, come on, son. Let's go. Time to be the face of the company," Alistair said, his attempt at a light-hearted tone sounding forced and hollow. The picnic was held at a sprawling private park that Finch Industries rented out for the occasion. It was an impressive display of corporate largesse. There were bouncy castles, pony rides, a catered barbecue with a whole roasted pig, and a small army of event staff in branded polo shirts. Alistair moved through the crowd with a practiced smile, shaking hands, clapping men on the back, and making polite, meaningless conversation with their wives. Catherine was a natural, laughing and chatting, remembering the names of children, making everyone feel seen. Alistair felt like an actor in a play he hadn't rehearsed. He was more comfortable in a boardroom, dissecting a balance sheet, than he was making small talk over a paper plate of potato salad. Leo trailed behind him, his hand clutching Alistair's, his eyes wide and slightly overwhelmed by the noise and the sheer number of people. He kept tugging on his father's sleeve. "Dad, can we go to the woods? I saw a path." "Not now, Leo. I have to talk to Mr. Henderson from operations. Stay with your mother." Alistair detached his hand and strode away, already recalibrating his smile for a senior vice president. He missed the crestfallen look on his son's face, the way his small shoulders slumped. Leo felt like one of the branded napkins, a prop for the day's performance. His father was here, but he wasn't really with him. He was with the company. Meanwhile, on the other side of the park, near the service entrance, Samuel stood with Maya. He had come for his last paycheck. Henderson had called and told him to pick it up at the picnic, a final, thoughtless humiliation. He'd had to bring Maya along, as Mrs. Gable was at a doctor's appointment. He tried to keep her away from the main festivities, not wanting to explain why all these people were having a party while her papa was out of a job. But Maya's curious eyes took everything in. She saw the ponies, the brightly colored castle full of screaming children, the tables laden with food. "Papa, can I have a balloon?" she asked, her voice small. Samuel's heart broke a little more. "Not today, my bird. We can't stay long." He saw Henderson by a supply tent and walked over, leaving Maya on a bench with her sketchbook and a small box of crayons, her most prized possessions. The exchange with Henderson was brief and awkward. The man handed him the envelope with a mumbled apology. As Samuel turned to leave, his eyes swept across the crowd, and for a moment he saw him. Alistair Finch. He was laughing, a false, booming laugh, as he spoke to a group of executives. He had his son with him, a boy about Maya's age, who looked just as lost and unhappy as Samuel felt. A bitter anger rose in Samuel's throat. That man, in his perfect world, had shattered Samuel's with a single, careless command. He had taken his dignity, his security, all for a smudge. He turned away, the sight of Finch's casual happiness too much to bear. He went back to Maya, but she wasn't on the bench. His stomach lurched with a sudden cold fear. "Maya!" He spotted her a moment later, standing near a line of manicured hedges that separated the main park from a wilder, more overgrown area. She wasn't looking at the party. She was looking through a gap in the hedges, her sketchbook forgotten at her feet. Following her gaze, Samuel saw the Finch boy, Leo. The boy was walking away from the noise and the chaos, his hands in his pockets, his head down. He slipped through the same gap in the hedge and started down a narrow, little-used dirt path that led into the dense woods bordering the park. Samuel felt a prickle of unease. He had done some cleanup work in this park before. He knew that path led towards an old, abandoned quarry. It wasn't safe. For a split second, he considered shouting, raising the alarm, pointing it out to the boy's father. But the anger, the raw wound of his firing, held him back. Why should he help that man? The man who had judged and condemned him without a second thought. It wasn't his problem. He took Maya's hand. "Come on, little bird. It's time to go." "But, Papa," Maya said, her brow furrowed with concern as she looked back at the path the boy had taken. "He's all alone." "He'll be fine," Samuel said, his voice harder than he intended. "His father is here. Let's go." He led her away, turning his back on the path, on the boy, and on the man who had ruined his life. He tried to convince himself it was the right thing to do, that it was none of his business. But as they walked towards the bus stop, he couldn't shake the image of that small boy, walking all alone into the woods, and he couldn't ignore the troubled, questioning look in his own daughter's eyes. Leo breathed a sigh of relief as the noise of the picnic faded behind him, replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves and the chirping of unseen birds. The air here was cooler, smelling of damp earth and green, growing things. This was better. He hated the noise, the fake smiles, the way his father held his hand but squeezed it a little too hard, as if reminding him to perform. He just wanted to be quiet. He just wanted to draw. He clutched the small set of charcoal pencils in his pocket. He'd seen a monarch butterfly, a flash of brilliant orange and black, and had followed it. It had led him through the hedge and onto this path. The butterfly was long gone, but the path beckoned, a secret invitation away from the bright, loud world of the picnic. The woods grew thicker, the trees taller, their branches knitting together a canopy that dappled the ground in shifting patterns of sunlight and shadow. He felt like an explorer in a new land. He found a fallen log covered in soft green moss and sat down, pulling out his small drawing pad. He wasn't a great artist, not like the pictures in the books his mother read to him, but he liked the way the charcoal felt, the way he could smudge it with his thumb to make shadows. He drew the log, the ferns growing around it, the trunk of a giant oak tree. He lost track of time, absorbed in his own quiet world, the only world where he felt completely himself. After a while, a rumble echoed in the distance. He looked up. The patches of blue sky he could see through the leaves were gone, replaced by a bruised purple-gray. The wind began to pick up, making the trees sway and whisper. He felt a sudden chill. Maybe he should go back. He tucked his pad and pencils into his pockets and stood up, but he wasn't sure which way he had come. The path seemed to have vanished. He chose a direction and started walking, his small heart beginning to beat a little faster. The woods that had seemed magical and inviting now felt menacing. The shadows deepened, and every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. Another clap of thunder, much closer this time, made him jump. A fat drop of rain hit his cheek, then another. Within seconds, the sky opened up. The rain was a solid, roaring curtain of water, plastering his hair to his head and soaking his polo shirt in an instant. He began to run, slipping and sliding on the muddy ground, his breath coming in ragged sobs. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get out. He saw what looked like a clearing ahead and scrambled towards it, pushing through a curtain of wet branches. But it wasn't a clearing. The ground simply disappeared. He had a terrifying, weightless moment of falling before he landed hard in a tangle of roots and mud. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot up his leg. He cried out, but the sound was swallowed by the storm. He was at the bottom of a deep, eroded ditch, what might have once been a creek bed. He tried to stand, but a fresh wave of agony from his ankle sent him crashing back down. It was twisted at an unnatural angle. He was trapped. Cold, wet, and terrified, Leo curled into a ball, pulling his knees to his chest. The rain hammered down, and the ditch began to fill with muddy, swirling water. He cried for his dad, for his mom, his small voice a thin, hopeless thread against the fury of the storm. Back at the picnic, the first drops of rain sent people scrambling for the cover of the main pavilion. Catherine found Alistair, her face tight with worry. "Have you seen Leo?" Alistair frowned, scanning the crowd. "I thought he was with you." A frantic search began. Their voices, calling Leo's name, were quickly lost in the downpour. The corporate party atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a rising tide of panic. Event staff fanned out, their bright polo shirts quickly soaked dark. Alistair's corporate composure cracked, then shattered completely. This wasn't a variable he could control, a problem he could solve with a sternly worded memo. This was his son. The carefully constructed walls of his world came crashing down, leaving him exposed and terrified. He ran out into the rain, his expensive shoes sinking into the mud, shouting Leo's name until his throat was raw. He was just a father, a terrified, helpless father, and nothing else mattered. On the bus ride home, Maya was quiet. She sat pressed against Samuel, watching the rain stream down the windows. She kept tracing the letter L on the fogged-up glass. "Papa," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "That boy, the one in the woods, is he okay in the rain?" Samuel's gut twisted. He had been trying to push the thought away, to tell himself the boy was fine, that his powerful father would have found him by now. But he knew those woods. He knew the old quarry. And he knew the sudden violent fury of these autumn storms. "I'm sure he's fine, little bird." But he didn't believe it. The lie felt heavy and sour in his mouth. He was consumed by a war within himself. The anger at Finch battled with a basic human decency. A child was in trouble. What kind of man was he if he did nothing? What was he teaching his own daughter? He looked down at Maya, at her worried, innocent face, and he saw the answer. She knew what was right. Her simple, uncorrupted heart knew. The bus stopped at their corner, but instead of getting off, Samuel squeezed Maya's hand and pushed the button for the stop after that, the one that was a 10-minute walk from the park. "Change of plans, little bird," he said, his voice grim but resolute. "We have to go back." They got off the bus and ran, huddled together under Samuel's thin jacket, the rain soaking them to the bone. When they reached the park, it was chaos. Police cars and an ambulance had arrived, their flashing lights cutting lurid strobes through the twilight and the downpour. People were shouting, running, their faces pale with fear. Samuel saw Alistair Finch. He was no longer the titan of industry. He was a wreck of a man, his face ashen, his suit ruined, his eyes wild with a terror Samuel recognized as the primal fear of a parent. He was arguing with a police officer, his voice cracking. "My son is out there. You have to find him." For a moment, all of Samuel's anger melted away, replaced by a profound, aching pity. In that moment, Finch wasn't a CEO. He was just a dad, and Samuel knew what that felt like. He knelt down so he was eye level with Maya. He had to be sure. "Maya, my love, the boy we saw, can you remember exactly where he went? It's very, very important." Maya nodded, her face serious. She pointed a small, certain finger towards the hedge. "He went through there, Papa. He was following a butterfly." Samuel didn't hesitate. He grabbed the arm of the nearest police officer. "My daughter," he said, his voice clear and steady over the storm. "She saw him. She knows where he went." The officer looked from Samuel's worn clothes to Maya's small, rain-streaked face with skepticism. But Alistair overheard. He lunged towards them, his eyes locking onto Maya. "She saw him. Where? For God's sake, where did he go?" Before Samuel could answer, Maya spoke, her voice small but clear. "He went down the path, to the quiet place." Without waiting for the slow-moving adults, Maya slipped away. She wriggled back through the gap in the hedge, her small body moving with a purpose that shamed them all. Samuel, Alistair, and 2 police officers plunged in after her. Maya didn't seem to notice the thorns that snagged her dress or the mud that tried to claim her shoes. She moved with an unerring instinct, her father's daughter, a child comfortable in the overlooked and forgotten parts of the world. She led them down the now treacherous path, the rain turning it into a river of mud. She stopped at the mossy log. "He sat here," she said softly, pointing. On the ground, nearly washed away, was a smudged charcoal drawing of a fern. Alistair let out a choked sob. It was Leo's. He had been here. Maya cocked her head, listening. Over the roar of the rain, she heard something else, a faint, weak cry. "Listen," she whispered. They all fell silent, and then they heard it too. A child's whimper, coming from somewhere ahead and below. They crashed through the undergrowth to the edge of the ditch. Down below, curled in the rising water, was Leo. He was pale, shivering, but he was alive. Alistair scrambled down the muddy bank without a thought for his own safety, slipping and sliding until he reached his son, gathering him into his arms. "Leo! Oh, God! Leo!" The paramedics were there in minutes, strapping Leo's leg, wrapping him in thermal blankets. As they carried him up and out of the ditch, Alistair followed, his hand never leaving his son. He was so focused on Leo that he almost didn't see the small family standing by the ambulance. Samuel, with his arm wrapped around his daughter, both of them soaked, shivering, and covered in mud. But it was Maya that Alistair's gaze fell upon. She was holding something she must have picked up from the ditch, a small, muddy, navy blue baseball cap. She held it out to him, her expression a mixture of shy and solemn. He took it from her, his hand trembling. He looked from the hat to her face, and then to the face of the man beside her. Recognition dawned, followed by a wave of sickening, soul-crushing shame that was so profound it almost brought him to his knees. This little girl, this brave, wonderful little girl, who had saved his son's life. She was the daughter of the man he had fired, the man whose face he had ordered to never see again, the man he had dismissed over a smudge. The world swam around him, the flashing lights, the rain, the worried faces all blurring into an indictment of the man he was. He had almost lost his son, and he had been saved by the child of a man whose life he had so casually, so cruelly tossed aside. The chasm between the two events, his callous act and this incredible grace, was too vast to comprehend. He could only stand there, clutching his son's muddy cap, the rain on his face, mingling with tears he didn't even realize he was crying, and stare at the janitor and his little girl, the two people who had just shown him the true meaning of value. The hospital waiting area was a purgatory of beige walls and bad coffee. Alistair sat, numb, while Catherine paced, her phone pressed to her ear as she gave updates to anxious family members. Leo was in with the doctors. They had confirmed a bad break in his tibia and fibula, along with mild hypothermia, but he was going to be fine. He was safe. The words echoed in Alistair's mind, but they brought little comfort, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw Maya's face. He saw her standing in the rain, offering him his son's hat, her expression free of accusation, filled only with a simple, profound goodness he knew he did not deserve. After what felt like an eternity, he saw them. Samuel and Maya were talking to a nurse near the entrance. They had been given blankets and hot chocolate. Maya was leaning against her father, looking exhausted but content, a small milk mustache on her upper lip. Alistair felt a powerful magnetic pull. He stood up, his legs unsteady, and walked towards them. Samuel saw him coming, and his body stiffened. He instinctively pulled Maya a little closer, a protective gesture that sent another spear of guilt through Alistair. This man had every reason to hate him, to curse him, to turn his back. He had saved Alistair's son, and Alistair had taken away his livelihood. The debt was immeasurable. Alistair stopped a few feet away, unsure of what to say. The usual tools of his trade, power, intimidation, money, were useless here? They were an insult. He was stripped bare, left with nothing but the ugly truth of his actions. "Your daughter," he began, his voice cracking. He had to stop and clear his throat. She saved my son. The words wouldn't come. How do you say thank you for something so immense? How do you apologize for something so petty and cruel? Samuel just watched him, his expression unreadable. He wasn't angry. He wasn't gloating. He just looked tired and dignified. "She did what was right," Samuel said simply. "That's how I raised her." The quiet statement was a more damning indictment than any shouted accusation could have been. It highlighted the vast moral gulf between them. I was wrong," Alistair managed to say, the admission feeling like pulling teeth. "What I did, firing you, there's no excuse." He looked from Samuel to Maya. "My son is alive because of you, because of your daughter." He fumbled for his wallet, an automatic ingrained reflex. Money was how he solved problems. He pulled out all the cash he had, a thick fold of $100 bills. "Please let me. I want to give you a reward. For her bravery. For—" Samuel held up a hand, stopping him. The gesture was gentle but firm, and it carried an authority that had nothing to do with job titles or bank accounts. "We don't want your money, Mr. Finch." Maya looked up at her father, then at Alistair. She stepped forward, out from behind the safety of her father's legs. She was holding her small, worn sketchbook. She shyly held it out to Alistair. He took it, confused. He opened it. Inside were pages filled with her drawings. A smiling sun, a lopsided house, with smoke curling from the chimney, a picture of her and her father holding hands. And on the last page she had drawn, there was a new picture. It was a drawing of two little boys, one with blonde hair and one with dark hair, playing together under a tree. She had drawn herself and Leo. She pointed a small finger at the drawing. "He likes to draw, too," she said softly. "He can come over, and we can draw together." The simple, innocent offer of friendship, of connection, from a child who had no concept of class or status or corporate hierarchy, was the final blow. It shattered the last of Alistair's defenses. He wasn't just ashamed. He was humbled. Utterly and completely humbled. He had built an empire of things, of assets and acquisitions. This janitor, this man he had deemed worthless, had built something far more valuable, a child with a beautiful, compassionate heart. Alistair sank into the nearest waiting room chair, the sketchbook open in his hands. He finally understood. The smudge on the marble wasn't the problem. The smudge was in his own soul. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits and quiet reflection for Alistair. He sat by Leo's bedside, watching his son sleep, his leg encased in a bright blue cast. He read him stories, helped him with his meals, and just watched him breathe. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about work. He had handed off control to his second in command, ignoring the flood of emails and calls. They seemed to belong to another lifetime. His whole world had shrunk to the size of that hospital room, and he found, to his astonishment, that his world had never felt larger or more meaningful. He and Catherine talked, really talked, for the first time in years. He confessed everything, the pettiness of firing Samuel, the soul-deep shame he felt, the terrifying realization of what he had almost lost. She listened without judgment, her hand resting on his, offering a quiet strength he hadn't realized he desperately needed. But the conversation he dreaded, the one he knew he had to have, was with Samuel. He got the man's address from HR and drove himself to a part of the city he had only ever seen from his office window. The apartment building was old but clean, with flower boxes on some of the windowsills. He walked up the 3 flights of stairs, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He felt more terrified now than he did before a multi-billion-dollar negotiation. He knocked on the door. Samuel opened it. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. He didn't look surprised to see Alistair standing there, looking awkward and out of place in his expensive suit. "Mr. Finch." "Samuel," Alistair said. "Please call me Alistair. May I come in?" Samuel hesitated for a moment, then nodded and stepped aside. The apartment was small, but it was filled with a warmth and a love that Alistair's sprawling, minimalist mansion completely lacked. Maya's drawings were taped all over the walls, a vibrant and cheerful gallery. The air smelled of cinnamon and something baking. It smelled like a home. Maya was at the small kitchen table, carefully coloring. She looked up and gave him a shy smile. "Hi." "Hi, Maya," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. He turned back to Samuel, who stood waiting, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't making this easy, and Alistair knew he didn't deserve it to be. "I came to apologize," Alistair said, meeting his eyes directly. "Properly, not in a hospital corridor. What I did was inexcusable. I was arrogant and cruel. I judged you by a standard that was meaningless, and I am profoundly sorry for the disrespect, for the hardship I caused you and your daughter." Samuel was silent for a long moment, studying Alistair's face. He seemed to be looking for something, a hint of insincerity, a crack in the facade. "I want to offer you your job back," Alistair continued, rushing the words. "With back pay, of course, and a raise, a substantial one." Samuel shook his head slowly. "I don't think so." Alistair's face fell. "Of course. Why would he want to come back? I understand, but please let me do something. I have to make this right." "Making it right isn't about giving me my job back, Mr. Finch," Samuel said, his voice quiet but firm. "You think you can fix this by writing a check, by flipping a switch and putting everything back the way it was. But you broke something. You showed me that to you. And people like you, a man's entire life, his dignity, is worth less than a spot of dirt on the floor. How do I go back to polishing that floor, knowing that?" Alistair had no answer, because Samuel was right. He had seen him not as a man, but as a function, a faulty component to be discarded. "What can I do?" Alistair asked, his voice filled with a genuine, desperate plea. "Tell me what I can do to earn your forgiveness." It was Maya who answered. She slid off her chair and came over, holding up a new drawing. It was a picture of a man in a suit, looking very sad, and a little girl offering him a flower. "You can be our friend," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Samuel looked down at his daughter, and the hard lines around his eyes softened. He finally saw what he had been looking for in Alistair's face. Not just regret, but genuine change. The polished CEO was gone, replaced by a humbled, broken man who was trying to find his way back. "The job I had," Samuel said thoughtfully, "I was just a number on a payroll. No one knew my name. No one cared about the work, only that it got done. They just wanted things to be invisible, for the smudges to be gone, for the men who cleaned them to be gone too." He paused, looking at Alistair. "There's a problem at your company. Not with the cleaning, but with the people. You don't see them." An idea, born not of corporate strategy, but of human insight, began to form in Alistair's mind. "Then help me see them," he said. "Don't come back as a janitor. Come back and help me fix what's broken. You see the details everyone else misses. You have a pride in your work that I wish my own executives had. I'll create a new position for you. A supervisor of standards, a liaison for all our support staff. You can tell me what they need, what's really happening on the ground floor of my own company. You can help me make it a place where everyone is seen, where everyone's name matters." Samuel stared at him, stunned into silence. This was not what he had expected. This wasn't charity. It was a real offer, an offer of respect. He looked at Maya, who was beaming, and then back at the former titan of industry, who was now asking, truly asking, for his help. And for the first time since he had been fired, Samuel allowed himself to smile. "Okay, Alistair," he said, extending a hand. "I think we can start there." The months that followed were a quiet revolution. Samuel became a fixture at Finch Industries, but not as an invisible cleaner. He walked the halls with a quiet confidence, his official title Director of Workplace Environment and Employee Relations, a title so corporate it made him chuckle. But the work was real. He spoke to the janitors, the security guards, the cafeteria workers, the mailroom clerks, all the people who kept the great machine running but were treated like ghosts. He listened to their concerns, advocated for better equipment, fair wages, and reasonable schedules. He started a simple Employee of the Month program for the support staff, with the winner's picture proudly displayed in the grand lobby right on the marble he used to polish. He was, in essence, the company's conscience. The changes in Alistair were even more profound. He started leaving the office at 5 o'clock. He attended Leo's soccer games, cheering from the sidelines, not checking his phone. He took Catherine on dates. He learned to listen more than he talked. He discovered that his son was not soft, but kind, not weak, but thoughtful. He saw the world not as a balance sheet of profits and losses, but as a network of human connections. He learned the names of the security guards at the front desk. He said thank you to the woman who brought him his coffee. He saw the people, not just the functions they performed. The two families became an unlikely quartet. Many weekends were spent together. They didn't go to fancy restaurants or exclusive clubs. They went to the park, the real public park, not the manicured corporate one. They flew kites and had picnics. Alistair, in jeans and a simple sweater, would push Maya on the swings, his laughter genuine and unforced. Samuel would talk to Leo about different kinds of rocks and trees, patiently answering his endless questions. One perfect autumn afternoon, a year after the rescue, the four of them were sitting on a blanket in the park. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. Maya and Leo were a little way off, their heads bent together over a shared sketchbook, their friendship as easy and natural as breathing. Alistair watched them, a feeling of deep, quiet contentment settling over him. He turned to Samuel, who was watching the children with a similar expression of paternal love. "I think about it sometimes," Alistair said softly. "That day, if you hadn't come back, if Maya hadn't—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The dark abyss of that possibility was something he would carry with him forever. "She's a special girl," Samuel said, his voice filled with pride. "But any child would have done the same. Kids don't see the things we see, the walls we build between each other. They just see another person who needs help." Alistair nodded, looking at the city skyline in the distance. The gleaming spire of the Finch Industries building catching the afternoon sun. He had thought that building, that empire, was his legacy. He realized now how wrong he had been. His legacy wasn't in the steel and glass. It was here, on this simple blanket. It was in his son's laughter, in his wife's smile, in the quiet, profound friendship of a man he had once deemed worthless. It was in the lesson taught to him by a little girl with a kind heart and a box of crayons. A smudge had almost cost him everything, but in the end it had been the very thing that had allowed him to wipe his own life clean and see what truly mattered.